Hello, welcome to Outlaw Bookseller, and today we're celebrating, or rather I'm celebrating, 500 subscribers in a little over 6 months. Slightly disappointed. I was hoping to get the 500 before 6 months because the plan is to get to 1,000 within a year, which will allow me to bring a little bit of money in to improve the production quality and to put more into the general quality of the videos overall. But nonetheless, we're here. So thank you to everybody who subscribed and the many friends who've helped me along the way, with particular reference to my cousin Neil and to Jules Burt, both from have channels. I'll put links in the descriptions to the video to their channels so you can join them because they're fantastic. And here we are. So I thought, rather than just crow on about that for a channel update, I thought we'd sort of have a chat about some other things, just to let you know what's coming up. Obviously, there are still things I've talked about which I haven't done yet. I've talked about the Rock and Roll Berlin video. I've talked about the Stranglers Toller on the Sea video. Neither which have happened yet. They will happen. I have had some constraints recently in the house where I shoot because of some work we're having done. That should be over soon. And the most exciting thing really is over the next week, I'm going to do a couple of interviews with local artists. That's artists local to me in Bath, who have done some interesting work internationally. So they're not wannabes, they're the real thing. And I'll be posting those, hopefully one on Saturday and one towards the end of next week. The first one is somebody who was involved with the rock band Hawkwind, and the second one will be a science fiction writer published by Gollancz. So that's coming up. So I thought now I'd talk about a little bit what I've been reading and what I've been sort of posting recently. And anybody who follows the channel regularly will have seen me sort of talking about the word visionary. And the word visionary is bandied about. And I think I first used it on this channel in a video about the Hawkwind album Hall of the Mountain Grill, when I talked about the sublime and the visionary experience. And since then I've thought more about that, and I've been reading writers who are often describing visionaries, and you think, well, what does this word mean? Because if you look it up on the internet, you get lots of things related to business and being a leader, which is not really the original use of the word visionary. So I just called up on the Collins Dictionary on the computer here. I use a Collins Dictionary, which I've had for many years. I've used that to write several books, and it's described as an adjective marked by vision or foresight, a visionary leader. It also suggests that a visionary idea is one incapable of being realised or affected, that's unrealistic. When it comes to applying it to a person, a visionary is characterised by idealistic or radical ideas, especially impractical ones. And then somebody who's given to having visions. So there you are. So it's all, very vague, isn't it? So obviously the beauty of the English language is there's lots of vagueness. And the way in which I've sort of been speaking about it being used recently is reading certain writers like Ian Sinclair. I recently finished this book, but I'll talk about that in a few moments. And really, he is the sort of writer who's always talking about people like John Clare and William Blake, poetic figures who had very unique ways of looking at the world. And I mentioned in one of my own videos on hauntology, posted only this week, that I think a visionary is somebody who has their own ideas about things and their own system, but sometimes it's very difficult to pin down what that is. So maybe it's just an original thinker. So let's just say that a visionary is an original thinker who creates a body of work which is very idiosyncratic and particular to them, but nonetheless people find inspiring. And we have a lot of this in British art and European art particularly. It's a really sort of interesting thing. And the worry about the word visionary is that it's going to get bandied around too much, and it's going to become like the word icon or iconographic. It's going to lose its meaning. These days, everything seems to be iconic as opposed to classic, and we don't want to fall down that rabbit hole. So I'm just going to talk about some of the visionaries I've been reading about and looking at. But I'm going to start with a unboxing of this album, Live at the Witch Trials by The Fall. This is the cover with the American version. And I guess Marky Smith is one of those people who, often is described as a visionary. I've always been unconvinced, shall we say, by The Fall. I've probably not listened to them enough, but I remember first hearing this album when it first came out way back at my friend Julian's house, and it's a different cover to this, as I say. And basically I decided to get this because I felt it should be in the archive and that it was probably quite important. And he's somebody who wrote a lot of songs about sort of characters, and he had his own sort of cosmology set around Manchester and what have you. And there was a certain degree of interest in the sort of uncanny sort of horror end of things, which I know little about with his work, I'll be quite honest. And in a way, The Fall are rather like sort of Pere Ubu, the band from Cleveland, who I'm a big fan of, particularly their early work. And I see David Thomas as, you know, the important intellectual figure. Mark E. Smith, I'm not entirely so convinced by, but I guess we'll find out when I listen to this a bit more, just to show you. And typically of me, this is a coloured vinyl one. It's red. There we go. And, you know, we'll have a look at that at some point, and I'll give it a proper listen again because it's been a long time. But I felt as an important sort of post-punk record that I really should have it in the archives. So I'm going to do the typical thing with that. So, I mean, I naturally think of the sort of stories that Mark E. Smith tells in his songs in the same vein as Pere Ubu, and particularly the Alfred Jarry play, Ubu Roy, King Ubu, and, you know, the idea of grotesque characters and their peccadillos and excesses. So that's Light of the Witch Trials on red vinyl. So I guess that's kind of the visionary thing that we're talking about with British art. And so I'm going to go through a few of the books I've read recently and just talk to you about them. And I've just finished this, as I say, The Black Apples of Gower by Ian Sinclair. And Ian Sinclair, of course, mostly writes about London. This is published by Little Toller. I would have liked a hardcover, but it's long out of print. It's quite difficult to find a decent one. And I have a connection to Gower because I opened and founded the city's largest and most successful bookshop there back in 1985. I only ran it for a year. I wasn't very happy in Swansea. I spent quite a bit of time on the Gower Peninsula and by the sea and what have you, which was great, but I didn't really take to the city. Sinclair grew up in Maesteg, which is relatively near to Swansea, near to Bridgend, where my parents moved after I left home. And this is about walks he does around the Gower, culminating in the cave where the Red Lady of Paviland was the oldest fossilized human being in the UK, was found some years ago, back in the Victorian period. And he did a walk to that cave in 1973 with B. Catling, Brian Catling, performance artist, writer, and generally strange person who was quite interesting as well. And, you know, it's about sort of going back, and there's stuff in here about a painter called Kerry Richards and a poet called Vernon Watkins. All these people are connected to go, and it's really, really good. And what I like about Sinclair is that he's one of those writers you shouldn't try and pin down. And to me, he's like one of the purest psychogeographers, because he does these travel things and he talks and he walks and he writes, and it's all about his own personal mythology, and he brings in all sorts of visionary people, and it's fantastic. And the worst thing you can do with this kind of thing is try and pin down what does it all mean. The meaning is disparate. It's different things, different aspects. You can't pull it down to one thing. And I really enjoyed this. This is probably the book of his I've enjoyed the most in recent years and recent rereadings. So that's great stuff. So especially if you live in Wales or you know that part of Wales, give this a try, because it really is a cut above. Somebody else who I wouldn't exactly say he's a visionary, but he's certainly a stylist. And, you know, a great stylist, a wonderful speaker and writer, is Jonathan Meads. Now, most people know Jonathan Meads. There's Jonathan on the back of the book. There he is. As an architecture critic and occasional food critic on the BBC. And he's done loads of films for the BBC. Lots and lots. Great things about buildings and places. And he is wonderful, wonderful erudite man. And he, you know, his vocabulary is absolutely fantastic. And he's one of these people who, rather like Will Self, he's very good on camera and he speaks very well in person. The difference between Meads and Self is that Meads is no different on the page, and he is equally eloquent and well judged in his prose stylings on the page as he is when he speaks on camera, which I don't think Self is so much. Self's vocabulary and ideas don't come across so well on the page, to my way of thinking, as Meads's do. So I really enjoyed this, and this is basically an autobiography of his childhood, and it's called An Encyclopedia of Myself. And he goes A to Z by subject, but like, for example, like E is earliest memory. When you get to M, there's lots of majors. He knew lots of majors, and there's a different section on each one. And that goes, of course, which is quite funny. And basically, you know, it's a really good way of doing it because it's not entirely chronological, so you don't get that sense of the, you know, the unfolding narrative where you have to know everything. There's an awful lot about his family and people he knew in this, and he's got obviously fantastic detailed recall, or he redid some of his research. But I really enjoy this, and I think this is his most accessible book. He's somebody, despite what I've said about his stuff on the page, I would rather watch and listen to him talk about buildings and architecture on the screen with pictures of the buildings than read his work about architecture, which is nonetheless really good. So I've enjoyed that. So is Jonathan Meads a visionary? He's definitely a stylist. I would say that by default, most of the great visionary artists are stylists. You look at William Blake. I mean, the thing that you notice about William Blake more than anything else is the style of his drawing, which is immediately distinctive, and despite influences from other people, probably from the Renaissance and what have you, you know it's his work straight away. So I'm looking at more of these sort of people and reading more about the city, place and person. And I've been increasingly interested in the impact of place on people, probably since I started going to Italy in about 2005. And I found that the landscape and culture of the Amalfi Coast had a huge impact on me and really got me thinking about what I wanted to write about. And it's the intersection of person and place and culture is what makes true psychogeography, as opposed to just going somewhere, walking around and talking about it. You know, there has to be an element of autobiogeography, as I say, and that's what's good about Sinclair and Meads. So on the Sinclair front, I got this book the other day, Selenic Drift. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, and it's a little chapbook, and it's a DOS chapbook, which means that you flip it over and there's another book on the back. The other book is Scales by Brian Catling, and I came across this online. I wasn't able to get it in my work, and small publisher, and the Ian Sinclair book has photographs by anonymous Bosch, which I thought was quite good, and it's about meteorites. So this is going to be really interesting. It's not about cosmology, about meteorites floating around in space before they come to Earth. It's about meteorites when they come to Earth. So that's going to be pretty interesting. And I think Catling's book is also about that as well. This will actually be the first Catling I've read. I've sort of held off reading them for one other books. So we'll see. So I'm giving it a go with some short stuff next. So that's a really nice little DOS chapbook. So great cover that. So looking forward to that. That'll be interesting. Something I came across the other day at White Horse Bookshop in Marlborough. I did a video about that. It's on my sort of playlist about book shopping sometime, which I think is the best independent bookshop in the Southwest. It's certainly the best one I've been to. And I came across this book, Strange Labyrinth by Will Ashen. And I thought I must get that. And when I went into work on Monday, I discovered that we actually had it with our nature writing. I just hadn't come across it, and yet I worked there all the time. So it just shows when you're not looking for something, you don't always find it. And it's about Epping Forest. And Epping Forest, of course, is London. And I watch is he a psychogeographer? I don't think he is. I watch a guy called John Rogers on YouTube, and he doesn't bring enough personal mythology, I think, into his walks videos, which are great. He's been doing them for years, and he knows Ian Sinclair, he knows all these people. And I've sort of watched him sort of walk through Epping Forest, and I only really know central London, and it's great. But I'm going to read out to you what it says here. Strange Labyrinth. What might a writer find in litter-strewn Epping Forest? Filthy graffiti and frightening dogs, yes. But also Jacob and Margaret Epstein, Penny Rambo, so that's crass, a punk thing there, and Mary Roth, as well as robbers, lovers, ghosts and poets. But will he find himself? Or a version of himself he might learn something from? Now that's psychogeography. It's that intersection of person and place. Strange Labyrinth is a singular blend of nature writing, political indignation and cultural history, and proof that we shouldn't get lost in order to find ourselves, but merely to accept that we are lost in the first place. So that's going to be really interesting. It's published by Granta, who did some great stuff, of course. And I do like the cover. This bit ghost box, isn't it? A bit hauntological in the trend of these things. But that's going to be one I'm going to look at before too long. I also decided to pick up a book which I read some of a long time ago and never finished, when I was much, much younger. And it's one of the classics of psychogeography. And that's Jonathan Raban's Soft City. And this is about London as well. And this is in Picador Classic. Picador, if you were interested in Picador, if you don't know what Picador is, it's the great B format paperback imprint, or it was. To me, it completely lost its identity about 20 odd years ago. In the 70s and 80s, it was pretty much unassailable. And Nicholas Royal, check my Nicholas Royal video. Nicholas has written a great book called White Spines about collecting Picadors, which is completely bonkers, and I loved it. So Raben, I've read a novel by Raben called Coasting a very long time ago. And this is about how, despite the city being hard and sometimes unpleasant, it has a softer edge as well. There's more to it than that, but it's a really lovely looking book as well. So I'm looking forward to having a go at that, because it's a long time since I've read him. And with the whole visionary writers thing in mind, because psychogeography in the UK is so dominated by London, because London, of course, is the biggest city in Europe. There's this amazing history going back, a couple of thousand years. Very few cities have as consistent and as managed and as chronicled a history as London. Paris is another sort of sovereign sort of city of psychogeography. So, naturally one will tend to look at those things. And because some of the greatest living psychogeographic writers and visionaries, to use that word again, write about London or live in London, it's only natural we cleave to that. A book I've always been in two minds whether I'd ever read this or not. And it came out over 25 years ago. And this is somebody who's written about London, but he mostly writes about Northampton, and that of course is Alan Moore. And this is Voice of the Fire, his first novel. Absolutely beautiful. Look at that, isn't that lovely? I mean, I was kind of sucked in by the great cover there, and it's got what appears to be a horned god there in the centre, and the antlers, what have you. So that kind of ties in with my whole folk horror thing I was doing a while ago as well. And looking at the back of it, it seems to be 10 little vignettes, short stories, about England over a 6,000 years span. And I have to say at a glance, it reminds me of The Chalk Giants by Keith Roberts, which I will probably talk about in relation to this when I read this. Alan Moore, I do like Alan's writing. He's obviously very important graphic novels, comics writer who sort of raised the game incredibly in the 80s with things like Watchmen and Swamp Thing, which is fantastic. Even though I'm more Grant Morrison sort of guy, Grant came along slightly later. I don't really rate Neil Gaiman in this respect. I mean, I find him a bit goth-light. He's like the Tim Burton of comics writing and fantasy writing. He's got good taste. If Neil Gaiman says something is good, he's usually right, but his own writing doesn't really grab me very much. So I've got this to go at, and I'm very much in this sort of mood, so we shall see. But very beautiful, as you can see. He wrote a much bigger novel that came out a few years ago called Jerusalem, which is massive, and I'm not certain about that. I don't always like really big books, because usually I find they don't need to be that big. There's a lot to be said for economy. Jonathan Meads, because I'm rediscovering him, I thought I'd look again at his debut. I think this is his first book, Filthy English, short story collection. Sadly, I don't have the Paladin original. I wish I did, because it's much better cover than this and much prettier than this. But that's still in print, that's short stories. So I'm going to give that a try. I've always shied away from his fiction, because I've always suspected that it's overwritten compared to his non-fiction. But we'll see. So I'm going to have a go at that. So as you see, we're getting into the Visionaries here. And somebody that Alan Moore talks about and wrote about in the Ian Sinclair edited London City of Disappearances anthology, which is absolutely fantastic, and I devoured that very quickly. 600 odd pages, loads of contributors, loads of interesting people. Talk about this guy Steve Moore, this novel Somnium. This is published by Strange Attractor, who do Joe Banks's Hawkwind book, and Strange Attractor do lots of really interesting books, things which you can't sort of categorize. And no relation to Alan Moore, though they were mates, and he wrote comics and he was a science fiction fan and what have you. And this is a fantasy novel about the moon goddess Selene. Hecate, Diana, I guess, as well, would be the other aspect. Michael Moorcock's given a blurb on the back. Ian Sinclair has. And, I have to be in the mood for this kind of thing, but I am in the mood, so I will let you know. These are culty books which loads of people have already read, but being skeptical about these sort of things and having read a lot of fantastic literature, I am of the view that very often the things which sprawl are not always the best, so we'll see. But yeah, so I've really fallen back down that rabbit hole. So I'm re-examining all these things. I'm going to look back to an important book, the book which started Ian Sinclair's career properly, Lead Heat, which is the book about ley lines, Hawksmoor's churches in London. It's supposed to be a prose poem. And this is the sort of source of all this sort of stuff. The sort of modern trend in British London psychogeography pretty much comes from this book, and obviously it has precursors, Alfred Watkins, O Straight Track, what have you, and there's lots of occult writings which relate to that. So I'm going to revisit Lead Heat, and also another book which I've often found very slippery, but it's just very beautiful, and I feel the time has come to go back to it again, is Hawksmoor by Peter Ackroyd, which takes a lot of the ideas from Lead Heat and builds them into this novel with a contemporary strand and an archaic strand. And yeah, very, very beautiful there. Hamish Hamilton, 1985. Who'd have thought of it? All that time has gone by. And of course, Ackroyd was a huge bestseller then, but he was a bit too esoteric for a lot of people. But because the British have this habit of, or I say the British, certain classes and certain types of people in Britain, if they read a review of a book in a certain paper, they have to buy it so they look good at their dinner parties. And, you know, I know that's terribly scathing. I'm sure a lot of them, you buy these books and read them, enjoy them. But, you know, I am very sort of keen on people finding their own way. It's easy for you. You say it's easy for you. You're a bookseller. But I wasn't always a bookseller. And even at the beginning, I had this way, this ability to pick through what I was interested in. And I think that's what the real reader does. You know, you take chances, you make mistakes, you find your own way. And maybe someday I'll do something about the psychogeography of bookshops and libraries, and how you find books and how you navigate the literary world to follow your obsessions. And of course, it's much easier now because of the internet. Or maybe it sort of encloses things more. You get the closed loop of the Amazon recommendation at the bottom of the screen. So that's a lot of the stuff I've been looking at recently. Somebody I've mentioned a couple of times, and I'm aware that I've been meaning to talk about his books, but I haven't really sort of got into that. Let me just move these mugs out of the way so I can access them. There's a guy called Merlin Coverly, and I want to praise Merlin because I think he's really lucid, and it was reading his stuff that got me back into this. And this is his book on psychogeography, which has gone through several printings. It's from Oldcastle Books. I think I've shown it vaguely before. But the beauty of this is that Merlin's very skeptical and direct, and he's concise. And he boils what psychogeography down is. He says that it changes, the meaning changes, people use it for different things, and he has sort of a nice little vein of skepticism which I really like. This is his book on hauntology, which is fantastically lucid and probably the best non-fiction book I've read in about a year. And you know, he's not somebody who is writing these books to get you to buy into things. He is presenting the evidence. He's objective. He does put a bit of opinion in, but he's not somebody who's saying, oh yeah, you know, psychogeography is cool, hauntology is cool, these things are cool, or they're not cool. He just lays it down there for you, and he does a really great job. This is his book on occult London. A lot of this I knew. There's interesting stuff in here about the sort of the vampire. Is it the Hampstead? It's not Hampstead, is it? Bear with me. Highgate Cemetery vampire. The Highgate Vampire, that's the one. Bizarre, 1970s, very Hammer. And all sorts of other things, Spring Heel Jack. So that if you don't know about the occult in London, that's good, because he doesn't take it too far. For example, when he starts talking about John Dee, he doesn't start speculating wildly. He sort of sticks to what's known and what's definite, and I really like that. So that's a little insight to what I'm reading at the moment, what I'm about to read. There are other things I'm reading as well. I've just finished rereading a children's book that I read when I was 10 by Ruma Godden called Kizzy. No, it's called The Didacoy. The TV series is called Kizzy. That was quite sweet. And because it's a children's book, she'd put a different head on. So there's other things being read as well. And yes, I am reading Toiler on the Sea, Stranglers fans. So that's an insight into that. So there's some interviews coming up. There'll be more book content. There's some more SF to come as well. I did a Robert Silverberg the other day, and once I can access a lot of my books, which I can't at the moment, I can go back into that and do some more of that. So again, thanks for subscribing, everybody who has subscribed. If you do watch this channel and you haven't subscribed, please do, because if I can keep it going, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort. It is fun, but it takes up a lot of time. If I can get the point where I can bring in a little bit of money, and then I can do fewer videos with better production values and sort of focus more on the things that you'd like to see as well as what I want to do. So this is Outlaw Bookseller celebrating 500 subscribers, signing out for now. Bye.